The boy had always felt a quiet pull toward the sound of the piano, even though he didn't fully understand why. Every afternoon, when other children rushed home to play or gather in the streets, he found himself walking toward the community music hall. It wasn't a fancy place, just an old building with tall windows and fading paint. But to him, it looked like a doorway into another world. Through those windows, mixed with dust and sunlight, came the sound that held his heart still every time. The soft notes, the sudden loud ones, the gentle rhythm, they all felt like stories, spoken in a language only his chest could understand. He wasn't a student there. He didn't belong to any music class. He didn't have lessons, instruments, or the money to pay for either. He simply watched from outside. Some days he stood at the window, standing on his toes just to catch a better view of the shining black piano sitting in the center of the hall. Other days he sat on the bench outside, listening to the sounds blend with the evening breeze. He never caused trouble, never spoke to anyone. He just observed Dot inside. The students barely noticed him. They were busy practicing for contests, preparing for small concerts, or receiving instructions from teachers who took their work very seriously. The boy didn't blame them for ignoring him. After all, he was just a kid from a quiet neighborhood, wearing simple clothes, often a little dusty for running errands before coming there. He never looked like someone who belonged in a music hall. Still, his fascination only grew stronger. Every time he heard the piano keys being pressed, his eyes would spark. It wasn't envy. He felt it was something softer, something hopeful. He wanted to see how it felt to touch the keys himself, even if only once. He imagined running his fingers across the smooth surface, feeling the vibration of the notes as they rose. He imagined creating a sound of his own, something that came from his heart, but he never dared to step inside. The music hall had an air of seriousness around it. The director was strict, the instructors were focused, and the students moved around like they belonged to a world built on discipline and long practice hours. The boy had watched enough to know that wandering in would not be welcome. On most days, an assistant or a senior student would come to the door and tell him to leave. They weren't rude, but they weren't patient either. They assumed he was just curious or bored, or maybe just someone with nothing better to do. They didn't know the thought that burned inside him every day. They didn't know that the sound of the piano made his world feel larger and calmer at the same time. Still, he stayed close. He would wait until someone practiced a song he loved, or until a melody drifted out that made his heart beat a little faster. On rare days, when no one noticed him, he got to sit a little longer. Those were his happiest moments, even if he didn't participate. Listening felt like enough. One late afternoon, when the sun was dimming, the boy arrived at the hall as usual. The warm light touched the windows, making them glow like golden mirrors. Inside, the students were practicing a difficult piece. Their hands moved quickly, stumbling at some places, speeding through others. The instructor corrected them sharply, repeating sections, tapping his foot with a mix of patience and frustration. The boy watched everything quietly. His eyes didn't follow the people. They followed the piano. That large black instrument in the center seemed like the heart of the room. The rest of the hall felt built around it. After several minutes, one student noticed the boy peeking through the window again. With a tired expression, the student walked over and pulled the curtain. The boy stepped back as the fabric covered the inside view. He wasn't upset. He had gotten used to moments like these. He simply moved to the side, where a small gap allowed him to hear even if he could no longer see. The piano started again, but this time, something different stirred in him. The notes felt more emotional than usual. Maybe it was the time of day, or the echo bouncing softly through the hall, or the fact that he was tired from running errands before coming here. But something inside him tightened. He pressed his hand against his chest, as if trying to calm the feeling rising there. He closed his eyes and imagined himself sitting in front of the piano, pressing the keys one by one. For a moment, he could almost feel the smooth surface beneath his fingers. He imagined playing the piece the students were struggling with. In his mind, the music flowed easily, beautifully, confidently. He didn't picture himself as a performer or someone who impressed a room full of people. He simply pictured himself finally touching the thing he admired most. As he stood lost in thought, the hall's back door opened. 2 assistants walked out carrying folded chairs. They saw the boy standing there and sighed. "You again?" One of them said, not angrily but tiredly. The boy lowered his gaze and nodded. He didn't want to cause trouble. He didn't want them to think he was there to irritate anyone. He just couldn't stop coming back. That one assistant walked closer. "Look, you can't stand around here every day. This place is for students. You understand that, right?" The boy nodded again, this time more slowly, but something inside him, something small but brave, felt ready to speak for the first time. He lifted his head and said in a soft voice, "I just want to listen." The assistant paused, a bit surprised by the boy's honesty. The other assistant looked at him too, but neither knew what to say. They weren't used to anyone speaking with such quiet sincerity. Before they could respond, the instructor's voice called from inside, asking them to hurry back. The assistants exchanged a look, and one of them muttered, "Just don't get in the way." They headed back in, leaving the boy outside once more. But now, something had changed. Saying those few words made him realize how big his longing really was. He didn't want to simply listen forever. He wanted to feel the piano. He wanted the chance, just once, to touch those keys and see what sound came from his own fingertips. For the first time, the thought wasn't just a wish. It was a need. The sun continued to sink, spreading orange and pink colors across the sky. The boy stood still, almost afraid of the new feeling growing inside him. But after a long moment, he took a deep breath. His hands trembled slightly. He didn't know why. Maybe it was courage. Maybe fear. Maybe both. He stepped away from the window and walked slowly toward the main door of the hall. Each step felt heavier than the last. His heart pounded so hard he could hear it. He knew he didn't belong there. He knew people would probably turn him away. But today, listening wasn't enough. When he reached the entrance, he stopped. The muffled sound of the piano floated through the door. His hand hovered above the handle. For a long moment, he just stood there. Then, with a shaky breath, he whispered to himself words no one else could hear. "I just want one chance." And for the first time in his life, he reached for the door, ready to step inside the world he had only admired from a distance. The moment his fingers touched the door handle, the boy felt a cold shiver run down his arms. It wasn't fear exactly, but something close to it. He had never stepped inside the music hall before. For years he had only admired the place from outside, watching students come and go, hearing melodies drift out from windows, imagining what it must feel like to sit at the piano. But today, something inside him refused to stay quiet. The soft wish he carried for so long had grown into a strong voice, urging him forward. He pushed the door slowly. It creaked just a little, and the sound echoed through the entrance hallway. Just that small noise made him hesitate. He almost closed the door and slipped away again. But he reminded himself why he was there. This wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was a longing he had carried quietly in his heart for so long that even he didn't fully understand it. Inside the hall, the lights were bright. The air smelled like wood, old sheet music, and a faint hint of polish used on the piano. The boy stepped in with soft feet, almost afraid that the ground might complain beneath him. He stood still for a moment, letting his eyes adjust to the brightness. Everything looked different from the inside. The tall windows, the rows of chairs, the music stands. Even the dust floating in the air felt new. He heard the sound of voices coming from the main room. The piano keys being pressed, the instructor correcting a student's timing, the light tapping of fingers on wooden chairs. The boy moved slowly, staying close to the wall. He didn't want to disturb anyone. He didn't want to draw attention. All he wanted was to live the moment he had dreamed about for years. When he reached the doorway that opened into the main hall, he stopped again. The piano was in the center of the room, shining under the overhead lights. Several students were gathered around it. Some were practicing small sections of the song they couldn't quite master. Others were whispering among themselves. The instructor stood with a book in his hand, his expression serious as always. The boy watched everything quietly. No one had noticed him yet. A part of him felt relieved, but another part trembled with worry. He didn't want to get in trouble. He didn't want people to mistake him for someone trying to sneak around Dot just as he stepped back. Trying to decide whether to leave or stay, one of the students saw him. "Hey," the student said, raising an eyebrow, "what are you doing here?" His voice was not harsh, but it carried an edge of surprise. The boy froze. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Several other students turned their heads. Their eyes landed on him one after another. Some looked confused, some amused. A few recognized him as the kid who always stood outside. Before he could gather the courage to explain himself, the instructor noticed the attention shifting. "What's going on?" The instructor asked, walking closer. The student gestured toward the boy. He came inside. The instructor turned to look at him. His expression wasn't angry, but it was firm. "This is a classroom," he said. "Who gave you permission to enter?" The boy swallowed. His throat felt dry. He knew this moment would come, but he hadn't expected it to be so soon not before he even had a chance to speak. I just wanted to watch," he said softly. The instructor sighed. "You can't wander in. This place is for students." The boy's eyes lowered. His fingers twisted together nervously. He felt a wave of disappointment wash over him. He understood the rules. He understood the boundaries. But today he had hoped, just maybe, things would be different. Before he stepped back to leave, a different voice spoke up from the group of students. "He's always outside," one said. "Every day." Another student added, "He listens to everything. Maybe he just wants to learn." The instructor looked at the boy again. His eyes softened, but only slightly. "Do you want to learn music?" he asked. The boy hesitated. He didn't want to say the wrong thing. I don't know," he answered honestly. "I just like the piano." Several students exchanged amused looks. One of them chuckled lightly, not in a cruel way, but in disbelief. The instructor folded his arms. "Do you know how to play?" The boy shook his head quickly. "No, I never tried." That made the students laugh a little louder. Not to mock him, but because they didn't understand how someone who had never touched a piano could feel so drawn to it. The instructor sighed again, deeper this time. "Listen," he said, "playing the piano is not easy. It takes time, effort, and training. You can't just walk in and expect to touch it." The boy nodded, though his heart sank. He knew that. He had always known that. But knowing didn't make his longing any smaller. He gathered the courage that felt like it was slipping from him, and spoke softly, "Can I just touch it once?" The room went quiet. Even the students stopped whispering. A few raised their eyebrows. One shook his head in disbelief. Another one smirked as if expecting a joke. The instructor blinked. "Touch it?" he repeated. The boy nodded. "Just once. I won't do anything else." One student laughed under his breath. "What difference will one touch make?" Another said, "He's not hurting anyone." But a third student crossed his arms. "This is not a playground. We don't let random people walk up and try the piano." The boy lowered his eyes again. He knew it was a lot to ask. He wasn't a student. He wasn't trained. He had no right to the piano. But he couldn't help trying. The instructor rubbed his forehead. "Look," he said, "this instrument is expensive. It's not a toy. And students are preparing for a performance. You can't interrupt." The boy felt a tightness in his chest. Maybe this had been a mistake. Maybe he should have stayed outside like always. He took a step back toward the door, but then something unexpected happened. One of the students, the same one who earlier pointed out the boy was always outside, spoke again, but this time with less amusement and more curiosity. "Why do you want to touch it so badly?" The student asked. The boy looked up slowly. His answer wasn't ready. He had never put his feelings into words. But he tried. "I just feel like I need to," he said quietly. "I don't know why. I just want to know how it feels." His honesty made the room go silent again. For the first time, the instructor seemed unsure of what to say. The students looked at each other, confused, maybe even a little moved. They weren't used to someone speaking with such simple sincerity. The boy waited. He didn't argue. He didn't beg. He simply waited, his heart pounding, his breath unsteady. The instructor finally spoke, but his tone had softened. "Even if I allowed it," he said, "you would have to promise not to disturb the practice." "I won't," the boy said quickly. "I won't touch anything else. I won't make noise. I just want to feel the keys." The students whispered again. Some rolled their eyes. Others looked thoughtful. Then another student, the one who had been struggling with the difficult piece, spoke with a half smile. "Let him touch it. Maybe the piano will magically play for him." A few laughed. The boy didn't mind. He didn't care if they joked. All he cared about was that the chance was still there. The instructor took a long breath. "Fine," he said at last. "Just once. And only for a moment." The boy's eyes widened slightly. His chest tightened with excitement, fear, and disbelief all at once. "But," the instructor continued, raising a finger, "after that, you step aside and let the students continue. Understand?" "Yes," the boy whispered. His heart raced as he stepped forward. Each step felt like it carried a lifetime of dreams. The students stepped back to give him space. Some watched with curiosity, others with amusement, and a few with genuine interest. The boy reached the piano. It was even more beautiful up close. The smooth black surface, the white and black keys, the reflection of the lights on its lid, everything felt unreal. He lifted his hand. His fingers trembled. He wasn't afraid of the piano. He was afraid of the moment he had dreamed about for so long. Slowly, gently, he placed one fingertip on a single key. And made the softest sound. The boy's breath caught in his throat. For the first time in his life, he had touched a piano, but the moment wasn't over. Something inside him awakened something he never knew had been waiting. And the next thing he did would change the room in a way no one expected. When the boy placed his fingertip on that first key, the soft sound that came out was so simple and gentle that it almost felt like a whispered greeting. The students watched him closely, waiting for him to step back as the instructor had said. But instead of pulling his hand away, the boy kept his finger on the key a moment longer, feeling the tiny vibration under his skin. It was a feeling so new, so delicate, that it made his heart tremble. He had imagined this moment for years, but the real experience felt far more powerful. The smooth surface of the key, the quiet echo spreading through the room, the way the air shifted around the sound, all of it made something inside him open up like a door he never knew existed. The instructor cleared his throat, as if to remind him not to get carried away. But the boy wasn't disobeying. He was simply absorbing everything, memorizing every detail of this small miracle. Then, slowly, he pressed another key. This time the sound was slightly louder, fuller, carrying a different tone. The students' whispering faded. A few leaned forward without realizing it. They expected random noise, something clumsy or childish, but the boy's movements were steady. He wasn't striking the keys. He was touching them like something fragile, something important. The instructor watched with crossed arms, prepared to step in at any moment. But something made him pause. Maybe it was the boy's expression, a look of honest wonder, like he wasn't trying to impress anyone. Or maybe it was the quiet respect with which he treated the piano. The boy pressed a third key, then a fourth. Each sound blended gently with the last, forming not a song, not yet, but a soft pattern. A kind of searching, a kind of learning. It was as if he was letting the piano speak first, letting it teach him its voice. The students began to whisper in a different tone now. Not mocking, not dismissive, more like curiosity. Is he guessing? One murmured, "He's never played a piano before, right?" Another asked, "That's what he said." The boy didn't hear them. His entire world was focused on the keys in front of him. He moved his hands a little, lifting his fingers and letting them float just above the keyboard. His breathing slowed. He didn't know what he was doing, not in a trained or technical sense. But his heart knew the sounds he longed to hear. Then something unexpected happened. The boy played a small sequence of notes. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even a full melody. But it carried a feeling, a soft sadness mixed with hope. The kind of sound that didn't need words. For a moment, no one moved. The instructor straightened slightly. His eyes flicked to the boy's hands in surprise. He knew the sound wasn't random. It came from someplace deeper. The boy continued without thinking. His fingers pressed the keys with surprising control for someone who had never touched a piano before. There was no rush in his movement. Everything he did was slow, careful, and thoughtful, like a person discovering a treasure buried beneath dust. He formed another small group of notes, then another, and each one blended with the previous, as if his heart was leading him forward. The students exchanged glances. Their earlier amusement had disappeared completely. "That's not guesswork," one said quietly. "How is he doing that?" whispered another. The boy, lost in the moment, pressed a slightly deeper key, and the sound echoed across the hall like a quiet cry. Something about that note felt familiar to him, like something he had always carried but never spoken aloud. His fingers moved again. A soft rhythm formed. Nothing too complex, just a gentle pattern like a heartbeat. But the feeling behind it filled the room in a way none of them expected. It was then that the instructor finally stepped closer. "Stop," he said quietly. The boy's hands froze in the air. He looked up quickly, afraid he had done something wrong. The instructor studied him with a strange expression, not angry, not annoyed, more like someone trying to understand something unbelievable. "Where did you learn that?" the instructor asked. The boy blinked. "Learn what?" "Those notes you just played." The boy looked down at the piano. "I don't know," he said softly. "They just felt right." The instructor opened his mouth, but no words came out. It was clear he didn't have an explanation. The students whispered among themselves again. But now their voices carried a sense of wonder instead of doubt. "He's doing it by ear. He's never touched a piano before? Really? How can he play something that sounds like a real melody?" The boy lowered his hands slowly, feeling unsure now. The moment that had felt magical just seconds ago was now filled with uncertainty. He didn't know if he had broken a rule or crossed a line. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked softly. The instructor shook his head. "No," he said, "but—" He paused, searching for the right words. It's unusual. Very unusual. The boy swallowed. His heart beat quickly again, but not from fear, from something he couldn't explain. Playing the piano had felt like breathing for the first time. Natural, easy, but he didn't want to upset anyone. "I can stop now," he said quietly. He started to step back, but before he could, one of the students, the same one who struggled with a difficult piece earlier, spoke up. "Wait," the student said. "Let him try the song." The room went completely silent. Every eye turned to the student who said it. "Are you serious?" Another student asked. "He's never played before. He just touched the piano for the first time." But the student shrugged. "So what? His notes sounded better than ours." A few students frowned at that remark, but none argued with the truth behind it. The instructor raised his hand to quiet them. He looked at the boy again, studying him carefully. "Do you know the song we're practicing?" The instructor asked. The boy nodded slowly. "I've heard it many times. Can you try playing it?" The boy's breath caught in his chest. His eyes widened. "I don't know if I can." The instructor's voice softened slightly. "You don't have to play it perfectly. Just try the first part." The boy hesitated. "What if I make a mistake?" A faint smile touched the instructor's face. "Everyone here makes mistakes. That's part of learning." The students looked at the instructor in surprise. He rarely spoke so gently. The boy looked down at the keys again. He lifted his hands slowly. They trembled, but not as much as before. He felt a strange warmth in his chest, a mixture of fear and something deeper. Hope. He pressed the first key, then the next. The pattern of notes flowed out. Not perfectly, not sharply, but with a feeling none of the students had managed to create. The notes blended smoothly, filled with softness and emotion instead of strict technique. The instructor's eyebrows rose slightly. The students stared. The boy continued, letting his memory guide him. He had listened to the song for months, hearing every detail from outside the window. He didn't know the names of the notes or the correct hand positions, but he knew the music by heart. A quiet beauty filled the hall, even with mistakes here and there. His playing carried a feeling none of them had expected, a natural connection to the melody. The students who had laughed earlier now stood still, their expressions softening. Some exchanged glances. Others simply watched in silence. The boy reached a part he wasn't sure about. His fingers hesitated for a moment. Instead of stopping, he let instinct guide him. The sound wasn't exactly the same as the original, but it carried the same emotion. When he finally lifted his hands off the keys, the room felt strangely quiet. No one spoke, not even the instructor. The boy stepped back, suddenly feeling shy again. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I know it wasn't right." The instructor blinked. "Right?" he repeated. That was the closest anyone has gotten to the song today. The students looked at each other again. Some nodded. Some appeared stunned. The boy didn't know what to say. He wasn't sure if they were being kind or serious. The instructor walked closer, placing a hand on the piano lightly. "You listened from outside all this time," he said, "and you learned this much? Just from listening?" The boy lowered his gaze. "I just liked the sound." The instructor studied him in silence. The students waited, wondering what would happen next. Then the instructor said something no one expected. "Try the next part." A quiet gasp spread through the room. The boy looked up with wide eyes. "Me?" "Yes," the instructor said. "You." The boy swallowed hard. His hands trembled again, but this time with excitement more than fear. He stepped forward. He touched the keys. The room leaned in, and once more, something inside him, something natural, something hidden, something powerful, began to wake up. The hall slowly returned to silence after the last note faded, but it was not the same kind of silence that had been there before. Earlier, it had been filled with doubt, whispers, and quiet judgment. Now it was full of something warmer, something that made the air feel lighter. The boy stood beside the piano, unsure whether to smile or step back. His hands were still shaking a little from the feeling that had rushed through him while he played. It wasn't fear this time. It was something closer to relief. The guests stared at him with wide eyes, as if none of them could understand what had just happened. Even the director, who had been so strict and stubborn earlier, stood frozen near the front row. His jaw was slightly open, and he had forgotten to blink. The boy could see it clearly, and for the first time that evening, he felt a small spark of confidence. He looked toward the place where the caretaker stood. The older man didn't try to hide his pride. His eyes were bright, and his hands were clasped in front of him the way someone does when they're trying not to show too much emotion. He gave the boy a small nod, slow and reassuring. That simple nod made the boy breathe again. He stepped away from the piano, wondering what came next. No one had told him whether he should take a bow or just walk back to the corner where he had been standing before. His thoughts were muddled, and his heart was still racing. But before he could decide anything, something unexpected happened. The director lifted his hand out at first. It looked like he was trying to speak, but no words came out. Instead, he started clapping. One slow clap, then another. His palms made a deep, echoing sound that filled the hall. The guests looked at one another, confused for a moment, but then something shifted. They joined in too. Their claps grew louder and stronger, until the entire hall was filled with applause. The boy didn't know what to do. He stood there with wide eyes, his body stiff, as though he might disappear if he moved too quickly. He looked around, unsure who the applause was really for. But then he saw their faces. They weren't clapping politely. They weren't clapping because someone told them to. They were clapping because they were moved. One woman near the front had tears in her eyes. Another guest smiled at him like he had done something magical. Several people leaned toward one another, whispering things he couldn't hear, but felt somehow the boy shifted his weight, trying to take in everything at once. The sound washed over him, almost too much to handle. He had never imagined a room full of strangers giving him this kind of attention. Most people didn't even notice him in day-to-day life. He was used to being quiet, used to waiting, used to stepping aside. But now, just for this moment, they saw him. The director finally found his voice. "Young man," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear, "where did you learn to play like that?" The room quieted slightly, though the applause continued in softer ripples. The boy opened his mouth, but he wasn't sure how to answer. He hadn't learned in any proper way. He didn't have a teacher or classes. He had learned from listening, watching, and trying. He had learned by sneaking in during breaks, touching the keys one at a time, building his own little world, note by note. "I just practiced," he said, barely above a whisper. The director stared at him as if that answer wasn't enough. But the boy couldn't think of anything else to say. What more was there? He had wanted to play, so he did. He had hoped someone might hear someday, though he never thought the moment would come like this. A few guests chuckled softly, not in a mocking way, but in a warm, surprised way. The director crossed his arms, his expression softening in a way the boy had never seen before. He took a step forward. "Do you have any idea what you just did?" The director asked. The boy shook his head. "You moved this entire room," the director said. "You didn't just play the piano. You told a story without using a single word." The boy felt something tighten in his chest, but it wasn't fear. It was something else, something unfamiliar. It felt like pride, but softer. The director turned to the guests. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "I think we all witnessed something rare tonight." People nodded. Some clapped again. A man near the back whistled loudly. The boy took a step back, overwhelmed. He wasn't used to being the center of anything. His hands curled slightly, as if they wanted to hide inside his sleeves. The director raised his hand again. "Come here," he said gently. The boy hesitated. He looked toward the caretaker for reassurance. The older man nodded again, telling him it was all right. So the boy walked slowly toward the director. When he reached him, the director lowered his voice, though everyone could still hear him. "You should be proud of yourself. Many people train for years and still can't play with the kind of feeling you showed." "I didn't mean to surprise anyone," the boy said, softly. "That's what makes it even better," the director replied. The caretaker stepped closer, unable to stay quiet anymore. "Sir," he said, "the boy has always had a special way with sounds. He listens more than he talks. And sometimes I think he hears things that the rest of us ignore." The director nodded thoughtfully. "It shows." A few guests came forward, smiling as they approached. One woman said, "Your playing touched my heart. It felt like you were speaking directly to us." Another man added, "You have real talent. You shouldn't hide it." The boy didn't know how to respond. Every compliment felt unreal, like he was dreaming. He looked down at his shoes, feeling shy. The director rested a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Listen to me," he said quietly. "If you want, I can help you. You have potential more than potential. You have something rare, something worth nurturing." The boy glanced up. "Help me how?" "I can offer you lessons," the director said. "Real lessons. I can teach you properly, help you grow, help you play on bigger stages. But only if you want that." The boy didn't answer right away. His mind raced with thoughts he had never allowed himself to think. Lessons, training, opportunities. It felt too big, too much, like a dream he wasn't ready to touch. But then he remembered the feeling he had when his fingers touched the keys. The warmth, the calm, the way the room transformed. That feeling was real. "I would like that," he said softly. The director smiled, not the strict smile he used earlier, but a warm one. "Good," he said. "Then we'll begin soon." The guests clapped again, this time lighter, but full of support. The boy felt something inside him rise, a feeling that maybe he did belong here, even if only a little. The caretaker patted his arm gently. "I told you," he whispered, "you only needed one chance." The boy nodded. He understood now. Sometimes one moment was enough to change everything. But something else happened then, something even he didn't expect. A child from the crowd walked up with wide eyes. "Can you play again?" The child asked softly. The boy blinked, surprised. He looked at the piano, then at the director, unsure. The director chuckled gently. "Only if he wants to. It's his choice now." The boy stared at the piano. The room felt different now, warmer, safer, full of people who wanted to hear him instead of pushing him away. He took a breath. Maybe one more song would be all right. This time. He walked toward the piano without fear or hesitation. His steps were steady. His hands did not shake. When he sat down again, the hall fell into a soft, eager silence. He placed his fingers on the keys, and once more he began to play. When the boy began to play again, the room felt different from before. The air no longer carried doubt or disbelief. Instead, it held quiet hope and gentle excitement, as if everyone in the hall knew they were about to witness something meaningful. The boy touched the keys with more calm this time. His hands moved with a soft confidence that had not been there earlier, and each note fell into the air like a small drop of light. He wasn't trying to impress anyone. He wasn't trying to prove anything. He simply played because something in his heart felt full, and he needed to let it out. The melody that flowed from his hands was not complicated. It was a simple tune, something he had often played when no one was around. A quiet, thoughtful sound that made him feel safe. But now, shared with this room, it felt bigger, deeper, and somehow braver. The guests listened with stillness. Some closed their eyes. Others watched his face, noticing how peaceful he looked while playing. The director stood near the side of the stage, arms folded gently, no longer strict or distant. He seemed proud, but also humbled, as though the boy's music reminded him of something he had forgotten many years ago. The caretaker stood at the back, leaning against a wall. His expression held quiet joy. He had known the boy had something special, but even he hadn't expected the moment to feel this powerful. When the last note faded into the air, the room did not applaud immediately. For a few seconds, everyone simply held the silence, letting the music settle into their hearts. It was the kind of silence that came not from confusion, but from wonder. Finally, the applause began. It started softly, then grew louder, rising like a wave that filled every corner of the hall. The boy lifted his head, startled but grateful. The clapping surrounded him like a warm blanket. He stood up slowly. This time, he did not feel shy. He simply bowed his head once as a sign of respect. The director approached him. "That," he said quietly, "was beautiful." The boy looked up at him, unsure what to say. He wasn't used to praise, especially not from someone so important. "You have a rare gift," the director continued. "And if you're willing, I want to help you take it as far as it can go." The boy hesitated for a moment, but not because he doubted himself. He was simply overwhelmed. So much had changed in such a short time. He had arrived that evening, expecting nothing, no stage, no attention, no chance. And now he was being offered a future he never imagined. "I would like that," he said softly. The director smiled, the kind of smile that comes from true respect. "Good. Then your journey begins today." The caretaker stepped forward and placed a gentle hand on the boy's back. "You did it," he whispered. "You showed them who you really are." The boy looked at him with an expression full of gratitude. The caretaker had always supported him, even when no one else had cared. Without him, the boy might never have touched a piano at all. Some guests began to approach again, wanting to speak with the boy. One woman said, "Your playing made me remember my childhood." "Thank you." Another person added, "I hope you keep going. You have something pure and honest in your music." The boy appreciated every word, though he didn't always know how to respond. He simply nodded and smiled shyly. A young child tugged gently on the boy's sleeve. "When I grow up," the child whispered, "I want to play like you." The boy blinked in surprise. "You can," he said. "Just don't stop trying." The child smiled brightly and ran back to their family. After the crowd had slowly begun to leave, the director asked the boy and the caretaker to stay behind for a few minutes. The hall was quiet now, with only the soft echo of footsteps in the distance. "I want to arrange proper lessons for you," the director said. "Regular ones? Not just whenever you find a free moment. I'll make sure you have access to a real piano every day. And if things go well, we can prepare you for performances." The boy listened, hardly believing any of it. Lessons every day? Performances? A piano he wouldn't have to borrow or sneak around to use. It sounded like a dream. "If you agree," the director added, "we can start as soon as tomorrow." The caretaker looked at the boy, silently asking what he wanted. "I want to learn," the boy said. "I want to get better." "Then it's settled," the director replied. They talked for a few more minutes, planning the first steps. The boy felt excitement building slowly, gently like a small flame getting stronger. When they finally left the hall, the night outside was calm. The sky was dark, but filled with stars. The caretaker placed his coat around the boy's shoulders to keep him warm, "You know," the caretaker said as they walked, "people spend their whole lives searching for moments like the one you had tonight." The boy tilted his head. "What kind of moment?" "A moment when everything changes," the caretaker said. "When someone sees you for who you really are." The boy thought about that as they walked down the quiet street. The night felt peaceful, and his mind felt lighter than it had in a long time. The next morning brought new feelings, nervousness, excitement, uncertainty, but he woke up before sunrise, eager to begin. The caretaker walked him to the music hall, where the director was already waiting. This time, the hall didn't feel intimidating. It felt welcoming. The director led him to a smaller room with a polished piano. "This one is yours for now," the director said. "Use it as much as you need." The boy sat down. The keys felt warm beneath his fingers, familiar yet full of promise. "Before we begin," the director said, "I want you to remember something." The boy looked up. "No matter how many lessons you take," the director said, "never lose the feeling you played with last night. That feeling is what makes you special." The boy nodded slowly, and so the lessons began. Days turned into weeks, and weeks into months. The boy practiced with quiet dedication, never boasting, never seeking attention. The director guided him with patience and respect. The caretaker supported him every step of the way. As time passed, the boy's skill grew, but something even more important grew with it: his confidence. He learned to play not only with talent, but with understanding. He learned to trust his own voice. Eventually, the day came when the director arranged a small public performance just for him. It wasn't a huge crowd, just a group of people who cared about music and wanted to see new talent as he stepped onto the stage. The boy felt a familiar quiet inside him. Not fear, just calm. He sat at the piano. The audience waited. He closed his eyes, and then he began to play. His music carried through the room, like sunlight breaking through clouds. People leaned forward, drawn in by the emotion in each note. When he finished, the applause rose around him, warm, grateful. Sincere. The boy looked out at the audience and felt something deep inside him settle into place. This was where he belonged. He had once been the child who only wished to touch a piano while others refused. Now he was the young musician who had found his voice, his purpose, and his path, and his journey was only beginning.